Luke Skywalker is the figurehead of the Jedi in the modern imagination. To many, he represents everything a Jedi should be: compassionate, selfless, devoted to the light. But buried under that popular image is a truth that most never consider: Luke's approach to lightsaber combat, his lightsaber philosophy. Luke's philosophy had a dangerous departure from the previous order. Unlike the masters of the previous Republic in Yoda, Windu, and Ki-Adi-Mundi, Luke did not train in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant from infancy. He did not spend decades steeped in doctrine, practicing the graceful defensive forms that the Jedi of the Clone Wars relied upon. Instead, Luke Skywalker learned the art of the blade in the crucible of a real war, against enemies who showed no mercy. Above all, it was his father, Darth Vader, who served as Luke's ultimate instructor, shaping him into a swordsman who believed in ending conflicts swiftly, decisively, and if necessary, lethally. To understand Luke Skywalker as a Jedi is to understand that his lightsaber style was not merely an imitation of the past. This was actually a conscious rejection of some of the most treasured dogmas of the old Jedi Order, and a testament to the lessons that he learned from the most dangerous foe that he would ever face: a Sith Lord, Lord Vader. This is why Luke Skywalker fought the way that he did, and why the Council of the Last Jedi Order would have looked upon him with both awe, but ultimately fear and dread. Why they considered Luke Skywalker's lightsaber form to be extreme. The traditional Jedi philosophy, a culture of restraint. For thousands of years, the Jedi Order taught that the blade was a last resort. Their combat doctrine was built more on patience, negotiation, and defense. Even when forced to draw their lightsabers, most Jedi defaulted to Form 3 Sarisu, a style that prized survival over victory. Yoda, the Grand Master, had long maintained that a Jedi must never allow aggression to dictate their actions. The Jedi Code enshrined this ideal in its very language. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no passion, there is serenity. These were not hollow slogans. They were the foundation of a culture that believed violence was inherently corrupting. To act in anger, even in self-defense, was to risk falling to the dark side. Jedi Masters like Obi-Wan and Yoda taught that every duel must be approached with measured detachment. Even the thought of killing an opponent was to be suppressed whenever possible. In many ways, the Jedi's restraint was admirable, but in their long struggle against the Sith and the dark side, it became a massive, glaring weakness. The Clone Wars exposed this fatal flaw in stark relief. The Sith did not fight to subdue, they fought to annihilate. Dooku was once a Jedi Master himself. He was a practitioner of Form 2 Makashi, the dueling style perfected for one-on-one combat. Anakin Skywalker meanwhile had embraced Gem So, a form designed to dominate through overwhelming strength and aggression. Many on the Council originally disapproved of Anakin's aggressive style. They believed it even bordered on arrogance, but Anakin believed, not without reason, that a Jedi needed the power to end a battle before the darkness could spread. Peace through superior arms. After Anakin fell to the dark side though, this tension between restraint and decisiveness would resurface in another Jedi, in his son, Luke. Unlike the younglings who began their training as toddlers, Luke started with nothing. He was a farm boy from Tatooine with no formal instruction until he met Obi-Wan Kenobi. And even then, Obi-Wan had only a few days to teach Luke the most basic concepts of lightsaber combat. He learned to deflect blaster bolts with a training remote aboard the Falcon. He received cryptic wisdom about the Force, but he never experienced the rigorous years-long institution that shaped Jedi like Mace Windu or Plo Koon. When Obi-Wan sacrificed himself, Luke lost his first mentor, and from here, he would only have a handful of days with Yoda on Dagobah. While Yoda imparted profound insights about the Force and the dangers of fear, he offered almost no direct instruction in lightsaber combat. This meant Luke's practical education came on the battlefield. His first real duel against Vader on Cloud City was a brutal, humiliating lesson. Vader dominated him without even using his full strength, dissecting his technique and battering him into submission. Yet in that defeat, Luke learned more than any Jedi instructor had ever taught him. Vader demonstrated the consequences of every error, how a careless swing could be punished with an immediate reprisal, how overextension created openings, how a single moment of hesitation could cost you everything. Luke emerged from Bespin scarred in body and in spirit, but with a new understanding of what mastery of the lightsaber required. Luke knew that his life and the fate of the galaxy would depend on his ability to fight like a warrior, not fight like a student. Not to fight like the old Jedi had. When Luke returned to face Vader on the second Death Star, he was no longer a novice. He was calm, focused, and determined to redeem his father. But even then, Vader remained the most dangerous opponent he had encountered. Vader's style was a fusion of multiple forms, each adapted to the realities of his own ruined body and his life-supporting armor. He was a broken, wounded, extremely dangerous monster. He had once heavily relied on Form 5 Gemso as Anakin, the raw, overwhelming power that had allowed him to batter down enemies with sheer force. But after Mustafar, everything would change. Encased in armor that both sustained and imprisoned him, Vader lost much of his speed and all of his athleticism that defined his previous approach to duels. He could no longer rely purely on aggression or strength. Instead, Vader was forced to evolve, become something more methodical, more precise. To compensate, Vader began to incorporate significant elements of other forms. Form 3 Sarisu, the same as his old master Obi-Wan, the same form that he had perfected. Ironically, Obi-Wan's defensive techniques had defeated Vader on Mustafar when Anakin's reckless aggression left him exposed. This was a humiliating lesson that Vader would never forget. He came to understand perhaps more profoundly than any other Jedi or Sith of this era, that an enemy can teach you more than any master ever will. Sarisu's principles of patient defense and careful redirection became essential to Vader's survival. He learned to absorb and deflect attacks efficiently. He learned to conserve his energy instead of relying on explosive maneuvers. In many ways, Obi-Wan remained Vader's most enduring teacher. Proof that even the humblest defensive style can bring down the most fearsome offense. But Vader would not stop here. He also wove in elements of Form 2 Makashi. Count Dooku, once Darth Tyrannus, had been Anakin's other great rival. Dooku's Form 2 was elegant, economical, and utterly precise, beautiful. Everything Anakin's Form 5 was not. After Mustafar, Vader studied Makashi with renewed appreciation. And in the confines of his armor, where brute force could no longer compensate for lost speed, Vader learned the value of refined technique. Vader trained to control the tempo of a duel, to place every strike exactly where it would do the most harm, and to conserve motion whenever possible. The result was a style that blended Sarisu's impenetrable defense with Makashi's clinical efficiency, overlaid atop the residual power of Form 5. Ironically, this adaptation made Vader an even more lethal swordsman than Anakin had ever been. Where Anakin had relied on talent and raw physicality, Vader now relied on mastery. He could no longer afford mistakes, and so he made fewer of them. When Luke faced Vader in their duel, he wasn't merely facing the corrupted shadow of Anakin. He was facing a warrior who had integrated the lessons of Obi-Wan and Dooku, two of the greatest duelists in all of galactic history, and who had fused their styles into something singular, relentless, and terrifying. This would shape the philosophy of Luke Skywalker and the rest of the Jedi Order from that point forward once Luke would become Grand Master. The crucible of Darth Vader. Emerging from the Galactic Civil War, Luke carried a new conviction. He believed a Jedi could not afford to let evil linger. Every duel was a crisis that had to be resolved as quickly as possible, because the longer the darkness was allowed to fester, the stronger it would become. This belief shaped his combat philosophy entirely. While Luke had inherited Form 5 from his father, he adapted it to suit his own temperament. Luke's style blended Gemso's powerful counters with a deliberate, almost surgical focus. Unlike many Jedi who treated their lightsabers as primarily a defensive tool, Luke saw this as an opportunity to impose finality. If a dark side user could be turned, he would try. But if they were determined to sow destruction, he would not hesitate to end the fight decisively. In this way, Luke's technique represented a quiet rebellion against the old Jedi way. He learned firsthand that restraint, while noble, could be fatal. The Jedi of the Republic believed patience alone would prevail, but Luke understood that sometimes it simply brought the dark side more power and more time to grow. This philosophy is why in Legends, Luke trained his new Jedi Order differently. He did not insist on a single doctrine of defense. Instead, Luke emphasized adaptability, decisiveness, and a clear understanding that mercy and inaction are not the same thing. Luke knew that in the galaxy's darkest hours, the greatest threat to peace was not aggression itself, but the refusal to act when action was necessary. This was a lesson the old Jedi had struggled to internalize. They believed that if they simply held fast to their doctrine, if they trusted in the slow unfolding of the Force's will, evil would always be contained. But Luke saw how that very mindset allowed Palpatine to rise unchecked, how it blinded the Jedi to the darkness growing in this mindset. To many of the High Council, the idea that a Jedi should strike preemptively or commit fully to offensive tactics would be seen as heresy. They would have argued that Luke's philosophy was a gateway to the same corruption that consumed Anakin. But in truth, Luke's approach was not born of arrogance or fear. It was born of understanding. He had faced the shadow in his own heart and learned that suppressing it did not make it disappear. Only confronting it directly could bring clarity and peace. This was why Luke never taught his students to fear their instincts. Instead, he taught them to know themselves so completely that no sudden surge of emotion would sway them. Luke trained them to meet conflict with resolve, not with hesitation. And while he would have respected Yoda's caution, he also knew that caution alone could never be enough to safeguard the galaxy from the dark side or the Sith. In rebuilding the Jedi, Luke rejected the idea that emotion must be shunned. He believed that compassion, connection, and even righteous anger could be harnessed for good. His new Jedi Order was a place where students would encourage to explore every facet of themselves, to question old dogmas, and to learn from the past without being shackled to it. This philosophy extended to lightsaber combat. Luke taught Form 5 as the backbone of their discipline, but he insisted that every apprentice also learn the subtleties of Form 3, the precision of Form 2. They studied Cerisu's calm defense and Makashi's elegant economy of movement. But Luke evolved the lightsaber forms. He no longer called them Forms 1 through 7. Instead, like his father, he hybridized them. And so the Jedi learned this way. But Luke's Jedi in lightsaber combat were far more aggressive than the previous order. Unlike the Jedi of the previous Republic until the Clone Wars broke out, Luke and his Jedi had seen war. They had seen conflict. They had seen death. They had seen the dark side. Luke had learned how Palpatine and Dooku had picked apart the Jedi who had used less efficient forms during the Clone Wars, how their pragmatism and defensive styles only delayed the inevitable. Luke knew firsthand how an opponent's strength could become lessons. His father's hybridized style had shown him that surviving long enough to end the threat often required adaptability above anything. This was why he believed his students needed to be more than just warriors. They had to be students of the entire tradition. Luke's academy became a place of synthesis, where no single doctrine was sacred. Every form was a tool, every philosophy a perspective to be examined. While some in the New Republic viewed this as dangerous, an opening for the darkness to creep back into the Jedi Order, Luke saw it as the only way to ensure that his order would never again be blinded by arrogance or complacency. This is reflected perfectly in his lightsaber skill. Everything Luke taught his students can be traced back to the final duel on the second Death Star. In that moment, every lesson, every failure, and every hope converged. He began the duel resolved not to fight. Luke knew that if he struck down his father in anger, he risked everything. But when Vader threatened Leia, Luke's love for his sister ignited a ferocity that he could no longer contain. His attack was reckless. It was purposeful. Each strike was delivered with the full force of his conviction to protect. It gave him real power. And when he severed Vader's hand, he saw the wires of the scorched metal, and he understood what he was becoming. Luke recognized that to truly defeat the darkness, he had to defeat it within himself. So he laid down his weapon. In that moment, Luke achieved what no Jedi before him had managed: perfect synthesis. He had fought with all of his strength, acted with all of his resolve, and then chosen compassion. This was not being passive. It was the ultimate act of will. Luke's order carried this philosophy deep into the future. His apprentices became a generation who embraced adaptability, compassion, and a readiness to act. They were taught that when darkness arises, it must be confronted swiftly, not delayed in the hope that it will resolve itself. But they also learned that no matter how powerful a Jedi becomes, the most important choice is the one to lay down their blade when victory is already won. That to strike in anger is to betray everything they stand for. Luke's lightsaber style was the embodiment of this duality. It combined Form 5's raw power, Form 3's impenetrable defenses, and Form 2's elegance, just like Vader. But most importantly, it was wielded by a man who had known both the temptation of hate and the triumph of compassion. His legacy is a testament to the idea that a Jedi's purpose is not simply to preserve peace, but to create it through courage, empathy, and the willingness to confront darkness without becoming it. In the end, Luke Skywalker was a Jedi who surpassed the limitations of the old order. He was the heir to their wisdom, but he also carried the hard lessons of their failure. He understood that peace does not come from inaction, but from the willingness to act decisively when the moment demands it, and the strength to stop when enough has been done. This is why the old Jedi would have feared him, because in Luke, they would have seen a vision of what they may become if they would be willing to question their own dogma. A Jedi who understood that sometimes the greatest threat to peace is not the darkness outside, but the fear of wielding the light within. And so, my friends, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on Luke Skywalker's surprisingly violent and aggressive lightsaber form, and why he believed it was completely justified? But as always, my friends, students, and fellow scholars of the Force, may the Force be with you in all of its forms, in all of its eras, and I hope you have a great day.